Hi, I'm Grace Carrison, and I head up Sales Solutions for LinkedIn and APAC. Almost 2 years into the global pandemic, we've gathered data, insights, and perspective paired with top innovators and sales leaders in the Asia-Pacific region to bring you this series. And with me to co-host this episode is Tim Grogan.
Thanks, Grace. Tim Grogan here, leader of our Australian sales solution business and key accounts across APAC, and couldn't be more excited to dig into today's topic. Today's episode, we're going to look at three kind of core areas. One, the Great Reshuffle, and what does that mean today to business? Two, borderless economies and how that impacts the way we make decisions. And three, the trends within the industries and the economies within APAC.
For some greater insight, I'm excited to have us join this episode Pei-Ying Chua, LinkedIn's lead economist and data scientist for Asia Pacific. Pei-Ying and her team partner with governments, NGOs, and think tanks to reduce and eliminate barriers to economic opportunity. So I'm excited that she's here to join us today. So Pei-Ying, welcome to the first episode of Take the Lead.
Thanks, Grace. Thanks for having me here.
Now, not many of our audience will know about this role in the company. Can you share with us your journey and how you got to this role at LinkedIn?
Absolutely. This is a fun story. So when I first became a data scientist, I actually had no intentions of becoming a data scientist. The role I had interviewed for was as a research analyst. But during the interview process, the interviewers determined that I had some of the skills needed to be a data scientist, and then just started telling me about the role and what a data scientist was. So that's why I became a data scientist eventually. And that's also why I'm a huge advocate of interviewing from a huge pool of people with different backgrounds and experiences. In terms of how I came to this role in LinkedIn, I think that LinkedIn's the largest professional networking platform in the entire world. It's got all these great insights about how people are moving around, what they're doing in terms of careers, the types of skills that they are learning. And not just that, it's got information about companies and the trends that are shaping the global economy. That's why the role at LinkedIn is so exciting, because it's a blend of an economist role and also a data science role. It allows us to use the data that we've got on LinkedIn, but to inform insights on what's going on in the world.
It's an incredible story and a great journey, Pei-Ying. I'm really interested to learn more from you around what do you see as, I suppose, what are you most excited about for 2022? What are the trends or the observations you're seeing that you could share with us today?
So I'm most excited about all the changes that are going on. I mean, the labor market has always been changing, but right now it's changing at a much faster pace. And we see a lot of new types of changes come in. One example is the green transformation. Green and sustainability has recently become a really big topic. We're starting to see this green skills and green jobs integrate into the labor market. So as an economist and as a data scientist, I'm always very excited when I see these kind of trends appear. And the second one that I'm really excited about is on how economies will be recovering. Because as we see the recovery going on, I expect that it will become really a job seekers market, as increasingly job seekers will firstly be in a much stronger position to renegotiate employment terms because the labor market's tightening. And second, and more importantly, people are rethinking their priorities. They are thinking about what they want. They're thinking about flexibility. They're thinking about working remotely or hybrid work models. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that emerging in the coming year.
Let's talk about the Great Reshuffle, which we're currently living through today, whether you're an employee or a company. And it's a period of what we call unprecedented change that the workforce and companies are going through. Now, our latest data in APAC shows that job changing is now much higher than pre-pandemic levels. as employees explore new roles and increasingly favor flexible and remote working opportunities. Now, Pei-Ying, when did this start? Can you share some insight with us?
So when COVID first hit last year in early 2020, we started to see a huge reaction in the labor market where we saw that hiring activity was going down. Lots of companies were adjusting to the sudden changes, and a lot of people found themselves either being furloughed or being laid off. Since then, we've seen recovery back to pre-COVID levels. And as of earlier this year, earlier in 2021, we started seeing that the hiring levels had actually recovered to pre-COVID. So that's a good sign because it shows us that we are on track to getting back to where we were originally before the pandemic hit. What we've also started to see, there are indications in the labor market data that tell us that the hiring is going to continue growing. One thing that we've seen is that demand for recruiters has skyrocketed by 7 times and is far above pre-COVID levels. So the demand for recruiters, you can think about this as an early indicator of where hiring demand is going to go. Because when companies start hiring recruiters, it indicates that they are preparing to really start hiring more employees again. And I think we're only just seeing the beginning of the recovery and of the increase in job transitions and reshuffling.
You mentioned there's lots of movement in the workforce, but also flexibility and remote work is another trend that you're seeing across the region. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? What does that mean when it comes to employees and also companies?
Business leaders also need to adjust their playbooks in the new normal. Firstly, by expanding their pipelines for candidates that come from alternative, non-traditional backgrounds. Think about skills rather than experiences or education backgrounds. We've found that flexibility is one of the fastest growing priorities for candidates who are considering a new job. In fact, it's become 12% more important according to our LinkedIn survey data.
Pei-Ying, I've got so many questions to ask you, but I know that we've got limited time today. So I just want to do a quick recap. One is there is a massive change as far as the Great Reshuffle that is happening right now, in which flexibility and remote work, and I suppose trust is the key thing that companies really need to keep in mind. Now, as lead economist, what are just some of the stats that you'd like to share with the audience today when it comes to flexibility, remote work, and the Great Reshuffle before we end this segment?
So one statistic that I like to talk about is what drives a job seeker to actually think about changing jobs. And what we found is that what triggers someone to start looking for a new job, or at least start browsing through job postings, is when they feel that their workload it's unmanageable, it's too much, and they struggle with the stress that's coming from it. In fact, we find that employees are 37% more likely to look at a job post when they are under this sort of work stress. But then what actually drives them to apply for a job comes when they feel that they don't get support from their managers. When that happens, they are 49% more likely to apply for a new job. And that's where I think companies really need to consider employee well-being and provide care and support to their workers. And that's one of my favorite stats because I think it reflects not just the labor market in terms of the supply and demand of skills or the supply and demand of jobs, but at a more intrinsic level of what it means to be an employee and what it means to be a leader.
It's so interesting, Pei-Ying, when I think around that focus on the work that people are doing and how the people are getting burnt out. What do you think is the right balance between the well-being and still achieving this productivity gains that we've seen since the pandemic?
So first of all, I think that everyone's different. The type of flexible work arrangements that they'll want is different. And it will be key for organizations and business leaders to determine how best to adjust their workforces and their policies in order to enable this. And fortunately, I think we are already starting to see some of this shift. With in terms of remote work, for example, we're seeing that companies are responding. They are increasing the number of remote work opportunities available when they start posting jobs. For example, in Australia, we see that the share of job postings that have remote work options is at 8.3% now in October 2021. Firstly, it's up from 3.8% as compared to 1 year ago. And secondly, it's also on a growth trajectory, meaning that even though economies are reopening and people do have the option of going back into the office, companies are still recognizing the need to have remote work options available for employees and for new hires. So I think that's a really good sign that reflects that employers and business leaders know what's needed and are adjusting their job descriptions accordingly. Secondly, I think it's important to also support employees as they are working remotely or as they are working in a hybrid manner.
Pei, I'm really interested on this whole concept around the borderless economy. How do you think the borderless economy is going to be showing up in our data? What can you see in our data that will help us, understand what's happening and what's playing out for the future?
Well, first of all, we've already seen some things appearing. For example, we've seen the rise of digital collaboration tools. We've seen that people are increasingly reporting more and more online collaboration tools, including things like video conferencing and also accessing online learning content more. So that's one of the trends we are already starting to see. Another thing that might occur is with the borderless economy, we also know that this means that people are no longer restricted to living in the places that they work. This means that we might actually not see physical migration going on, or we might not see it as intensely as we would expect because people now can work remotely from anywhere.
That's counterintuitive, actually, to what you think will happen.
Yeah, definitely. But I think that's really a reflection of where we are right now in terms of all the changes that are going on. We're going to see a lot of these new things appearing, manifesting in different ways that we've never seen before.
And if you look at our clients, Pei and Tim, we're already seeing that today. As far as the opportunity to tap into new markets without the physical presence of being there, remote engagement, remote selling is acceptable. And it's not only within your home country, but globally. And we've seen Australia, Singapore, Hong Kong, India-based headquartered companies engaging with people in North America and in Europe. And again, that remote engagement is increasing and it's becoming more acceptable month on month. One of the areas that I, from a conclusion perspective then, is there's no reason why you can't do, 80% of your sales process or your sales stages from remote, even when we all come back and return to the office, which is going to be hybrid anyway. And that hybrid is going to be more remote than it is in person.
Pei, I would love to just ask you, when you go to a friend's house on the weekend and you say, I work for LinkedIn, I'm a data scientist at LinkedIn, I work with big data, and they're like, I go to LinkedIn once or twice a week at best. What do you mean big data? How do you explain what it is you do, and how do you explain what the data is that we have?
So LinkedIn's got this thing called the economic graph. And what it is it's essentially all the data that's on LinkedIn. It's data from 800 million members. It's data across more than 200 countries. And we're able to see things like what kind of jobs people are applying for, what kind of skills are they reporting, what kind of conversations are they having on the platform. We're able to see all of this data, and we're able to aggregate it in ways and look at trends that are going on both across the world and in different countries or in different segments of the economy. That helps us to understand what's going on. That helps us to understand the changes that are happening. And it also helps us to see some exciting trends that emerge. For example, we're seeing more and more people report skills related to green. We're seeing companies take an increased interest in hiring green talent. And these are just some of the trends we can see through all the big data that we have on LinkedIn.
So the third and final topic of this episode is the growth of data economies and new industries in the Asia-Pacific region. Pei-Ying, in your role as both lead economist and chief data science, can you give us your perspective on what this means around data here in the region?
Data is being used everywhere, and I think it's now almost impossible to separate the use of data from most businesses. So as a data scientist, I mean, this really excites me because what it means is that we've got so much data and so much information that we can use to drive the decisions that we make. One important characteristic I want to point out about data is this concept of non-virality. What that means really is that, if one person consumes the data, the data doesn't just disappear. It's still available for someone else to use. It's not like a lot of other goods, for example, like a cookie. If I ate a cookie and, Grace, you couldn't eat the same cookie as me because the cookie would be gone. But if I used a piece of data, you could use the same data for a different purpose altogether. And I think that's really the power of what it is, because we're going to get a lot more data. We're not going to run out of it. We're going to have so much data that we will need lots of help in order to manage it. We're going to need tools and processes and rules in terms of how we collect the data, how we use it, how we store it, and even eventually, how we destroy it.
Now, you spoke about that we're not going to run out of data. And in fact, there's going to be potentially too much data. One thing that I'd like to ask you is, how do you trust that data and the importance of that?
In order for us to feel confident in using the data, we must first trust it, right? So we need to trust the source that it came from, that it's a reliable and accurate source. We need to trust that it's given us a good, complete picture of what's going on and not a biased view of just one very small part of the entire ecosystem. And one thing we also need to have in order to enable that are ways of validating the data. For example, if there are different sources of data all saying the same thing, then that helps to strengthen the validity of it, because it's not just one person saying one thing.
Now, let's shift gears a little bit. When it comes to growth of new industries and applying technology, specifically data, on how you identify that, how you see the trends, can you tell us a little bit more about it and what you and the team are doing and what you and the team are seeing, specifically here in the region?
Because LinkedIn has such a huge wealth and corpus of data, we have it in different time series, for example, and that allows us to track trends that are going on. Because of that, we're able to see the emergence of new trends. For example, the rise in people reporting more and more green skills, and also the increased use of digital tools, which spiked when COVID first started last year. So by having data that's on a time trend and that's got all sorts of granularity elements, we're really able to dive in and see what's going on at different points in time and be able to see what's emerging out of the labor market.
Before we say thank you for you joining us today, Pei-Ying, I do have one last question. If there was one key takeaway that you would like to leave the audience, what would that be?
So one key thing that I'd like people to take away is that, the labor market's changing so fast right now. And that makes it even more important for everyone to remain flexible, to remain adaptable to the changes. If you are an employee or a job seeker, think about what alternative paths you might have and think about the types of skills that might get you there. If you're a business leader, think about giving employees more flexibility and more autonomy as you move towards a hybrid workforce. And really just keep an eye on the changes that are going on, because there are going to be plenty of them, and we are all going to have to remain adaptable in the new normal.
Thank you, Paying. I always love hearing about new trends that we are seeing on the LinkedIn platform, and green skills and green industries is definitely one that we are having more conversations with our customers across industries.
Thanks, Tim and Grace, for having me. It was my pleasure to share our insights with the world.
You know, Grace, it's so interesting listening to around the whole skill-based economy, and you think of the story of Pei-Ying, where she didn't even know what data science was. She studied at Harvard. She's got all these incredible credentials, and she just literally fell into a role which, you know, probably 10 years ago didn't even exist.
You know, as we think about the Great Reshuffle, the borderless economy, and the emerging data-centric economies, I can't help but think the role that LinkedIn and Paying's team are playing. To those of you who may not know, LinkedIn's economic graph is a digital representation of the global economy. And that is such a unique position that LinkedIn is, to be able to fulfill our vision of creating economic opportunity for every single member of the workforce. So imagine over 800 million members, 36,000 skills, over 50 million companies, 11 million open jobs, and 90,000 schools. This is all the data on LinkedIn, and through every member, company, job, school, we're able to spot the trend like talent migration, hiring rates, the borderless engagement, and demand for skills in any region. And I just want to highlight that this is what Pei-Ying and her team are doing and looking at that data. And I'm excited about what we can do for sales solutions, for marketing solutions, and from the talent solutions business on how we can help shape and create opportunities for companies and government to thrive and be successful in the region.
Yeah, I mean, Grace, I couldn't agree more. And I think what's incredible when we're out in the market, but just talking to a number of clients, and you're able to share this level of intelligence, these insights that can help them understand their business, their competitive positioning, helping them with their migration strategies, but more importantly, where should they be investing their new office? What type of talent is being untapped and has complementary skills and can help them with their diversity goals. I think when you bring this level of intelligence to the conversation with a customer, it changes their perception of LinkedIn, but also helps them realize how are they making decisions in the past.
100%. And the one thing that Pei-Ying shared in the beginning are the emerging economies or the emerging industries that she's saying. And to me, Asia Pacific is ripe for that, because we do have a younger demographic that is already tech savvy. And so she spoke about the green economy and the greening of skills. Now, this is where the data that LinkedIn has, and from a sales solutions perspective, this is where we're already having conversations with customers around how are your customers changing towards a more sustainable environment and a more sustainable company. With the workforce changing, again, Gen Z really cares about the planet and humanity. What are the industries that you should be looking at to invest and to rescale your own sales organization? So I think what we're seeing now is we can help companies really prepare their own employees on reskilling opportunities, but also helping companies understand how their own customers are changing. And to me, that is really exciting.
You know, I've been using a phrase, insight-based selling. And insight-based selling to me is helping customers now today saying, well, where are the growth industries that you should be focusing on and tapping into? And if it's the green economy and sustainability roles and sustainability companies that are really understanding the new frontier and how to recognize new technology and create more value for the globe and the climate, how are normal service and product-based companies now tapping into that and identifying them and prioritizing those opportunities in the way they're trying to position their own propositions to them, to be able to reach out to them with the value proposition that they think will align to where that company could go. These are the things where the intelligence that's coming from this economic graph team to enable LinkedIn to have really meaningful conversations with our customers.
And what I would add to that, Tim, is with insight selling, this really is about the relationship. And that insight into that relationship is really critical. And it's not only when you make the sale, but it's a longer term. And what we're seeing is if you look at the onset of pandemic, many companies relied on data and insight to understand which customers and which industries were needing that digital transformation if you're in the tech sector, but then which are their customers are really needing you to pick up the phone and for you to say, hey, we're here to support. And from a LinkedIn perspective, that is exactly what we did is we have the data and the insights to be able to understand which of our customers are really needing our support and which other customers are really needing the productivity and the tools that's going to require them to look at new industries and new customers that really need their help with whatever product or services that they're offering.
You mentioned relationships, you mentioned helping our customers there being at the core, and we're seeing a huge shift. And, I think the pandemic's changed the way people actually need to sell, right? And putting the customer first, being really buyer-centric in the way you build those relationships, recognizing buyer behaviors significantly changed, that the buyer now is more versed and more aware of the trends within their industries and the players within the industries than they ever have been. How do you add value? At what stages do you add value? And one of the things where I'm really excited to see how our customers are now using our solution really effectively with Sales Navigator is automating the changes that we're seeing because of the Great Reshuffle. And there's nothing more disturbing to your business when your key customers or the people you've been working with leave and go somewhere else, because often you've invested significantly into those relationships. So how are you able to make sure that you know who all the people are and the right people, and the breadth of those relationships is really important. I think the other thing to be really mindful of, equally, there's a lot of people coming into your customer base because of the changes we're seeing in this Great Reshuffle. And how are you using the insights to be aware of when people are changing roles? And when they do become your customer, how do you take the early mover advantage and use the insight from LinkedIn to see that they've changed role, to be able to automate that in a way that you can reach out and say, hey, welcome to company X. This is what we represent. We're excited to help you on your journey. What a great icebreaker, and what a great competitive advantage that can be to actually keep track of what is hugely disruptive to a lot of our customers today.
I love that, Tim. And I know that we've heard it time and again over the last 2 years that, the pandemic has accelerated digital transformation. But what does that really mean? To me, it's about how does a company really look at what we call the analog processes that they have. And as you said, it's really automating that. And just as important is automating it because you want your employees to be successful. You want them to be productive, and you want them to have the best relationships with your prospects or with your current customers. And again, it's the data and the insights and how you develop, how you engage, and how you maintain that relationship over time is going to be critical. Because again, as you said, is all the information is already on the buyer's fingertips because everything is online. And so it's really about how you build that relationship in a scalable and an automated way that is still as authentic as being in person.
What really sort of a great reflection as well was around the diversity and how that now is becoming really, diversity of skills, this whole notion that what a traditional hire looks like has now changed. And that's probably been accelerated because of the pandemic. I mean, we are seeing, I've never seen a market with more talent shortages, because the borders are closed. And so we're not seeing that migration of talent, but also we're seeing a recognition that's probably not enough people to do certain roles. With these new skills, these new industries are developing new ways of working, new ways of thinking, and we need to reskill a huge amount of the workforce and also be perhaps not as biased and change our mindset on the type of people we need to be bringing in to a company, and the responsibility to be upskilling them with perhaps some of these new skills as well. I think that's going to be a significant change and will continue, I think, for some time.
So Tim, to add to your point, we only had to look at the last 12 to 24 months when companies of all sizes suddenly had to shift from in-person to remote work. And what companies have found is that employees are able to adapt. They're able to engage, to manage relationships, or even do different roles that they've never done before. And that's why we talk about it when it comes to skills-based. And it's not about the school that you went to. It's not about the experience that you've had over the last 20 years. But it's more around the different areas that you've been exposed to and having the skills that is transferable. To me, that's one. The second thing that you spoke about is around diversity. What I'm seeing as a positive view of hybrid or remote working is really expanding the talent pool that is now available, because you're no longer constrained around just hiring within a city or hiring within a country. Your talent pool is now borderless, just as selling is now borderless. And to me, that is just going to foster the diversity of experiences, the diversity of lens that potentially can come into to the workforce.
Yeah, I was really taken by the comment around that we actually, my hypothesis was, migration now, like how many people are going to be on the beach working? But of course, with COVID and border control, it was really interesting to hear that actually, no, we actually haven't seen yet that migration, but yet we are seeing an increase in remote jobs. And so, first of all, it does make me wonder what's going to happen when higher vaccination rates and will that migration follow? That's going to be an interesting one to watch, I think. But I wonder, my sense is that a lot of companies are kind of saying, we'll probably go back to normal. But I wonder whether that's not true. I wonder whether now that once people get a taste of remote working, once people have had that level of empowerment, I don't think it's going to be a trend that's going to go away. I think this is going to be more significant. And what is that going to mean to a lot of these companies that historically have, loved having people in the sort of environment? The other thing that I wanted to share that made me really reflect was our customers, and all of a sudden, because collaboration is so much easier, because these digital platforms are now enabling us to communicate far more effectively than we ever had, what's it going to mean to a lot of the organization's growth, where all of a sudden markets they maybe have thought, I'm not going to go there because I don't have a sales force there. All of a sudden, it's okay to have this type of meeting. It's okay to sort of talk this way. It's okay to collaborate that way. I wonder what it's going to mean for the local economies.
The last 12 to 24 months has made remote engagement in business even more acceptable. And what that means as we go into hybrid is that, people, offices will open up, people will go back to work, but they're not going to be going back to work full time. And so you have to be good at both in-person engagement, but also remote engagement. And how you prepare, and as you said, is how you demonstrate, like buyer first centricity is going to be really important. But what's exciting is that your market is no longer just your home market. Your market is now globally, and that's why we call it the borderless economy, because we are seeing that happen today.